Hello. Okay, so by way of introduction, I'm Emily Rich, as you've heard. I am currently the managing director of startups for Microsoft. I'm also a partner at Mate Ventures. And today, what I'm going to be focusing on is really talking about the ethics of AI. So, digging a little bit deeper into that. The company that I co founded and sold 3 years ago was an AI company. And since then, I've been, I'd say, like less passionate around the actual tech side and more passionate about what we're going to do with our data and our algorithms and really the ethics around it. So I've been contributing to quite a few research papers on that and have basically come to give you a little snapshot in the 20 minutes I have. So this is just really a taste to kind of get you started and get you to really start thinking about this sort of stuff. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure that we've heard the term 1,000 times, all of us. It's just constant now. When I first started, it wasn't as prevalent, but now I think when you say AI, everyone kind of knows what you're talking about. But just to give you one of the many definitions here. So artificial intelligence, so it's a branch of computer science dealing with the simulation of intelligent behavior in computers. The capability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. So that's the definition that I probably like the best. It's quite simple for, really everyone to sort of understand what we're trying to say is like, we're just imitating computers and the way that they're working, right? So we're just putting our human behavior into a computer and letting it run. So one of my favorite ones, for anyone who hasn't seen this is probably one of my absolute, I love dogs as well. That's another fun fact. I have two. I actually have a Pomeranian Chihuahua. This is the Muffin vs. Chihuahua algorithm challenge. So there was a study done around how do you tell the difference between things that look really, really similar and not so similar that you can easily just tell. But in some of these, this is pretty, what I kind of say to people is like, this is also pretty easy to tell on this screen because it's pretty blown up. But to the human eye, sometimes it's not even clear. So this was a study that was done where it was kind of misidentifying muffins and chihuahuas as muffins. And it started getting people talking about, the diverse data sets of algorithms and how that actually works and, how can the algorithm learn to tell the difference between these things? This is obviously a very benign example. This isn't probably going to harm anyone. But then when we start talking about things like race and gender and things like that, that's when it actually starts getting really real. But this is just a really fun example to start with, basically. I like it. So what we're seeing now is that, as I sort of said at the start, is like you can't go anywhere now in a company without hearing about AI. You can't go anywhere without hearing about, people trying to create sort of intelligent computing and all these things. And then it's like, okay, so what does this mean? Have we caught up? Do we have the right things in place? And we're putting all of this time and money and effort around these things. And so what does it kind of mean to the world, to society, that now companies, big and small, so I'm talking the smallest startups that I work with are implementing cognitive services, right? And then the biggest companies in the world, obviously, the Microsoft, Google, Amazons, you name it, are all, completely spending tons and tons of time and effort and money on this. So what it sort of means, this is what I wanted to kind of base this on. So what it means to me is, and to a lot of people, as you can see here represented, is a lot of people are talking about this. A lot of people are talking about discrimination in algorithms, discrimination in data sets. So what this kind of actually ends up doing is we need to start really thinking about how we create our data sets and how we're building our teams, and I'll kind of go through that a little bit later. But what we're kind of starting to get really thinking about is like, okay, so why does AI need diversity? And I think we all know it does. And I think it's just a matter of how we actually do that and implement that. And that's some of the things that I'm working on at the moment. So just to give you, this is a very, very small snapshot of some of the headlines you can just go on and read. And a lot of these are quite recent as well. So there's people all around the world talking about diversity in AI. And what I'm going to give is I'm going to give a few examples of, there's so many, but I'm going to give a few just to highlight real life case studies on how that actually sort of looks in the real world and the diversity imbalance and how it becomes a problem for AI when we're talking about it. And it comes back to a few things which I'll talk about, but I just really wanted to give this example on how many people are actually talking about this. So first example. This is I like this example, although it's a little bit challenging as well. But so the CEO search term displays 11% of women, right? And yes, that's completely true because there are less women CEOs, right? Now, the problem with something like this is that what we're doing now is we are scraping data, we're putting them in data sets, and then we're running algorithms around them. So, for instance, more men are being shown job opportunities, job ads for top level management positions. And this is happening through the data, which this data is actually true and correct. There are a lot less women CEOs, as we know. And the real thing comes now is we can't just use this one sort of set of data. We've got to be really, really explicit on how we're using it. And so this is one of the examples I really like because it is real data, number one. But number two, you are actually taking a particular piece of data and then skewing it to the same audience again, right? So that's kind of the thing that happens when you're kind of training your algorithms on these sort of data sets that don't have any diversity of thought in them. So that's one of my favorite ones. Okay, this one always shocks people, and it is 100% true. You can go on Google and Google it. I didn't make this up or even come up with this research at all. But face recognition software is 99% accurate if you're a white man. So this goes to tell us what we know is we haven't had a very diverse data set, obviously, when we've implemented this. Probably wasn't a very diverse team on the initial data set. There's a few really large data sets that are out there that people use. And what they do is they'll use those ones, and then they'll also kind of use some of their own and create some of their own data sets and put those in and just create a big algorithm off of that. So with some of these really, really large data sets that we're seeing, a lot of them are actually skewed towards having white men in them that's kind of what's seen as a face. So as you can imagine, this can be quite detrimental to people's lives. For instance, there's some really good examples out there around passport control now in some airports that aren't recognizing people. So people of color aren't being recognized as they go through the airport and things like that. So this is real life, and this is actually quite detrimental to society. So this is why I'm kind of talking about it is with the accuracy. This is great for one type of person. This is amazing accuracy. But then when we start talking about, females, we start talking about, other, just anyone else, it's like, well, so you're potentially not going to recognize me. That's kind of the thing that we're thinking. And that's, this is where there are a lot of companies now are cracking down on things like this. So it's not all bad. It is actually really good. It is now to a point where people are really, really thinking about this stuff, and they are putting things in place so that this isn't happening. Unfortunately, some of the larger data sets still have this skew. because they're just so big, and adding to them now is it's quite difficult. There's a lot of things that need to go into it, so that people are genuinely working on this. It's just things that you really need to consider if you are building out algorithms. Okay, so I'm going to play video. I think it's going to show my muffin. Yeah, it shows my muffin one again. But I just want to give you some sort of other sort of examples. This isn't my video. I took it from someone else. I credited them though, so. Yeah, if anyone saw this one, this was really, really bad. Yeah, so this was software that they actually put in cameras and things like that, and on phones. And that's a really big data set as well, that ImageNet one. Oh yeah, this is my Chihuahua muffin one. It's a blueberry muffin as well. They got this wrong in the video. So that was quite recent. That was the end of no, the start of 2019 that some of those things happened, and it just goes to show that not only are startups having issues with that, there are really big companies that are having issues with it as well. So it's not even about the amount of money that you have and resources that you have and things like that. It's like sometimes they're just not thinking through it, and they haven't got diversity in their mind as they're kind of constructing this. So I just want to go through sort of, I mean, I've talked a lot about the bad. There is a amazing work being done in this field. It's incredible, and I mean, of course it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but there are ways that we can go about correcting it, and then also ensure that if you are in the room and you are actually interested in, you're in AI, for example, and you are creating your own algorithms, and you might be using others' data sets, as we often do, and also building your own, just things that you can start thinking about to make sure we kind of do the right thing. So the first one I'm going to talk about is hiring diverse teams. And this one is super important because, as we saw from the 99% of facial recognition is white men, I don't actually know who was on that team that created a lot of those data sets, but I'm going to assume that it was, a lot of white men potentially that were creating that, because we have our own internal bias unconsciously, and that's why we really need diverse teams. And especially when we're talking about this kind of thing, this is where it gets really, really important, because as I mentioned, the team at Passport Control, why are they having so many issues identifying people? Because they just don't have diverse data sets going in. So, this is where it's really, really crucial to make sure that the team who are actually supporting are in here and they have their say, right? And they are creating the data sets as well. And using and creating high quality data sets. So as I've mentioned, there's huge data sets out there, massive, and you couldn't go and create your own in some instances. It's just not possible. You would be there forever. And this is why there are so many great open source data sets that are out there. The one thing that I kind of tell people to do is also overlay your own data sets so you are getting the diversity that you particularly need. And when you think about it, you really need diversity in every sense of the word, because you want everyone to use your product or service, right? You don't just want one person to use it. It's like if you told me I couldn't go somewhere because the facial recognition isn't going to, notice me, well, you've just lost another customer or whatever, right? So those are the kind of things that we're thinking about when we're building product. That's really, really important. And the third one, which is actually probably the most important, and I should put it first, but checking your own bias. So we all have unconscious bias, and this is ingrained in us, and you actually can't get rid of it. And there's obviously conscious bias, but there's unconscious bias. And the best way that I tell people to kind of get around this is like, really, you are going to have to work at it, and you're going to have to think and then think again. So you don't get to just think and then do. You have to think, and then you have to think about all of your end users, and then you have to think again. And this is where it got messy for a lot of these companies, and a lot of the data sets and a lot of the algorithms that were then produced is they didn't kind of double check some of that stuff and think again. And that was where the bias really comes into it. And as I said, it's really, really hard to get rid of. I think it's impossible. So the last one, which I'll talk about, so the auditing your algorithms, this is where it gets like a little bit more technical, but I won't go into the how to do this. It's just more about double checking and testing, and these are the things that we need to be user testing on, and for all users. So this is kind of where it gets a little bit messy with some of these products, is that they do user testing, but they do it on their team. And maybe their team all looks the same, or maybe they don't have the whole mix of people in their team, right? Because that's hard to do as well. So this is where it's really important to do some sort of outside testing as well on some of these things. As we've seen from some of the fails, a lot of that comes down to not auditing your algorithms and testing at that time. So that's where it becomes really, really important. So the last thing, just before I finish, and I think we're going to do Q&A? Yeah, okay. So the last thing, I just want to say, this is really around to kind of get you to start thinking about it and see that, okay, it is something that we all genuinely need to work on. It's something that has an impact in all of our lives, and it has something that has an impact on all of the products that we're potentially building or using or anything, right? So all of these things are so, so, so important, and they can make a really, really big difference. So thank you, everyone, for listening.